I walked through the door of the bar, and immediately I began to scan the setup of tables and chairs for my older brother Brian. He'd called me earlier in the week and asked if we could meet up. He said he had something he needed to show me. The bar we were meeting at was about halfway between our two apartments, and by the tone of the conversation we'd shared, I knew that this was not going to be anything good. I spotted him sitting at a table in one of the back corners, covered in a thin shroud of darkness due to the low overhead fluorescent lighting. I noticed he was smoking a cigarette. He hadn't done that in years. We exchanged greetings and a hug, like only brothers could. "How you been, bro?" he said nervously, while tapping the cigarette inside a small ashtray. Not bad. It's been a while. I thought you quit those damn things." He started to tell me how great he was, but he stopped himself after a bit. He told me that he had not slept well in a few days. Not since the package had arrived on his doorstep. I asked him what package he was talking about. And that's when he reminded me about something I hadn't thought of in years. The Star Wars fan film, something we'd made a few years ago now. When my two brothers and I were all still living at home, we decided we'd try to make our own little Star Wars movie. Like many other people, we had grown up as huge fans of the original trilogy, and Brian was working towards a bachelor's degree in graphic art design. So he thought the movie would be something he could use in one of his classes as a project. Plus, the whole idea was something that seemed like we'd been waiting our whole lives to do. I think we knew that pretty soon we'd all be out of the house and pursuing larger things in life, so we wanted to use the time while we were all still together. Brian would be in charge of finding suitable locations we could use for filming, and then he would be responsible for putting all the film together when we were finished. He was the only one who could, the only person with the technical computer skills and know-how between the three of us. My younger brother Mark would write the script and dialogue and fight choreography, while his girlfriend helped with making the costumes. Now mind you, these costumes weren't much more than rags and torn shirts, pinned together to give us the nomadic look of legendary, dueling Jedi and Sith. And me? Well, my job was to simply show up and try not to mess up my lines. The first day of filming, we all met at the house and then walked about a mile down a bike path towards a large farmhouse. Brian had spoken with the owner earlier in the week, and he had agreed to let us use his property for part of the filming. In addition to the empty farmhouse was another shed and the owner's home. The property was surrounded by trees, evenly spaced apart, and shrubs spread out in a large, open yard. Brian explained that the open yard would be used for filming the lightsaber battles, and then he would digitally add in stormtroopers and a ship landing to complete the scene. We also used a nearby monastery for filming the beginning scenes. The monks at the monastery were surprisingly cool about us using their space, although a few random visitors did give us raised eyebrows and narrowed glances. It must have been the costumes. All in all, it took us about 2 weeks to complete all the filming, due to our conflicting work and school schedules. Plus, there were a good number of bloopers and retakes that were needed. We were not professional actors after all. I'll admit, at first I thought the lines and dialogue were cheesy. The fight scenes, they needed multiple retakes, as we ended up hitting each other several times with the thin wooden sticks that would later come to life on screen as our dueling lightsabers. A couple of weeks after we finished the last day of filming, Brian and I were sitting in a bar, drinking and having a good time with some friends. I asked him when he thought the movie would be ready. I couldn't hide my excitement when I spoke. Yeah, about that. Come by the house tomorrow. There's something you need to see. I arrived at the house the next day, after barely getting through my only 2 classes that day. I was part excited and part nervous to see what Brian needed to show me. I never did get any more information out of him last night at the bar, even when I pressed him for it. And he'd barely cracked a smile, so I knew this was big. I made my way into the kitchen, where Brian was sitting with his laptop open. I could already see he was looking at some scenes we had shot at the farmhouse. We greeted each other with a simple "What's up?" and he indicated for me to sit down next to him at the table. I did so, with a growing level of apprehension, and Brian didn't say anything at first, so I spoke up. "Okay, so what is this that you needed to show me?" It was then that I realized Mark wasn't there with us. "Alright, well, I'm gonna just play one of the scenes that I've been working on. Tell me what you see." So, I watched it. The scene in question was where Mark and myself were walking around the farmhouse. The two of us, playing the roles of Jedi Master and Apprentice. We walked past my camcorder that we had used to film the scenes. And then, the scene cut to us facing the open field when the CGI-added stormtroopers attacked us, and a battle ensued. It all looked normal. I turned back to Brian, completely puzzled, and threw my hands up in the air. "Okay, if there's something I'm supposed to see, I'm not." He then silently responded by starting the scene over, and then paused it, just as the angle switched to the open field. He then pointed to an area past where Mark and I were standing, to what looked like a black blur on the screen by the tree line. It was then I saw it, and my eyes narrowed instantly. I asked him if he could zoom in on the blur. He must have done it already, because he went right to it in the middle of my question. What I saw made my jaw drop. Upon closer inspection, I could see what that blur was. It was a tall, thin figure wearing a black robe that covered their whole body. I couldn't even see their face, as it was covered by a large hood. But even the small area that wasn't covered up, it looked like a dark void, lacking any discernible features. And that was not even the strangest part. The hooded figure was holding what looked like a black camcorder in its hands. We were being filmed by a total stranger, and we hadn't even known it. "What the hell is that?" I said, with now elevated emotions. I have no idea, but I know I never saw it there when we were filming. It only went downhill from there. Brian proceeded to show me 3 other scenes where the figure also appeared in the background, holding its camcorder pointed at us. I couldn't believe or explain what I was seeing. We had filmed every scene during the day when it was sunny, so one of us should have noticed the figure at some point. But we didn't. Somehow, it had remained elusive. When we were finished, I sat with my hands covering my face. We have to tell Mark. I know he'll completely freak, but he has to know about this." Brian closed his laptop and gave me a look. I'll tell him, but I'm not going to the cops. I know he'll want to. What would we tell them anyways? I had to admit, he was right. The figure, or whatever it was, it had not made its presence known otherwise. It hadn't threatened or tried to hurt us. The rest of the day, my mind raced with disturbing thoughts about the whole situation. Why did it watch us, much less record us? Who or what even does that while wearing a black robe? Was it still watching us even now? Somehow hiding, just out of view. I would often catch myself double-checking my rearview mirror as I drove, or looking back over my shoulder as I walked down the aisles in the store. Hell, I even checked the closet and right under my bed before I went to sleep every night. Sometime later, I talked to Brian over the phone. I asked him if he'd seen anything else since the last time we saw each other. He said he hadn't, and that he did get around to telling Mark about the hooded figure. Of course, Mark had freaked out, just as predicted, and demanded to see it for himself. Brian said Mark's skin turned a sickly pale when he finally noticed it. Surprisingly, he agreed not to go to the authorities, and Brian was able to filter out the dark figure from the scenes using whatever software he was using at the time. The movie was finally finished. Everyone we showed it to loved it, and the three of us, we agreed not to talk about the figure again. It would be our secret that we would take to our graves. So, there we both sat, in the bar, in silence, for what seemed like an eternity. I have to admit, I had forgotten about that whole incident. Years had passed, and I had just pushed those dark memories to the back of my mind without a second thought. But in those few moments, the feelings of fear and paranoia came flooding back like a raging river. Brian looked at my face, and he knew. So, I guess we both had forgotten about it. At least I had, until I found it on my doorstep. "Did you open it?" I asked. He shook his head no, and said it was in his trunk. We paid our tab and made our way outside to his car. Remember when I spoke of that feeling of apprehension earlier? Well, it immediately found its way back into my stomach, and it began to twist in unnatural ways as Brian's car drew closer. We finally came to the back of his car, and he opened the trunk. Inside was a cardboard box that was still closed. Brian opened it, and I finally saw what was inside. It was a black camcorder and a note attached that said, "Play." But there was something else in the box as well. A folded up piece of paper with the word "Open" scribbled on it. I reached in and picked up the paper, giving Brian a glance. I opened the paper and read it. "I hope you like my movie, boys. I'm planning on shooting the sequels very soon."